Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar series for the project GreenS. Today is our sixth and last webinar for our GreenS supporters. And well, it's on market engagement, as you can see in the presentation that we have online and also what we sent before. And well, we chose this topic because during the on-site visits and also during the train the trainers, some of you expressed your concerns on implementing green criteria in public tenders for the reasons that if you innovate too much, the market might not be able to respond. And you could get maybe no reactions from the market, and your procurers then would be angry with you or find this whole GPP implementation more difficult and wouldn't be so willing to cooperate. This is actually a very common barrier. We have been discussing this a lot in all our GPP work, innovation work, and so forth. And well, one of the ways that is one of the tools that can be used to diminish this risk is to engage the market in the procurement process from a very early stage. And for this, there are different approaches that you can take. And our panelist today, David Morgan, will explain us a little about these approaches. David is Senior Commercial Services Specialist working at the County of Cornwall in the UK. And he has made some experience in the last years working with supplier engagement programs, which is exactly what he will be telling us about today. I will pass now the word to David, and please, if you have any questions, you can write them to me in the chat during the presentation, and we will have some time at the end of the session to discuss them with David. So David, please, whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks Estella. Hi everyone. I'd just like to say before I start, because you can see the door in the background of my video, if somebody walks in and you see a tiny head in the background at some stage, then I do apologise. They'll probably get the message pretty quickly that I'm mid-presentation, but unfortunately I can't lock the door and stop them coming in. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. As Estella said, I've been doing some work, particularly over the last 12 months, but really over the last 4 or 5 years on supplier and market engagement. You'll see on this slide as well that there's the City of Oslo and City of Copenhagen logos on there as well, and that's because the three of us, along with ePlay, are working together on the supplier engagement interest group in Procure Plus. I just wanted to give a nod to them because they've contributed to some of this work, as has John from eClay. So if John by any chance is looking over Estella's shoulder, then he'll see some familiar stuff in here as well. So, but hopefully what I'm aiming to do is to give you a little bit of food for thought maybe about when, where and how supplier engagement can be conducted and what type of benefits you can get from it. I think what's becoming increasingly apparent to me the longer that I work on this is that there's a lot of good intention around supplier and market engagement, but some people are doing it for the wrong reasons at the wrong times. Equally, we've got a lot of public bodies who are running supplier and market engagement, but don't necessarily see it as supplier and market engagement, just as good procurement. So I think there's probably also a lot of best practice out there that's not being picked up. So by way of a bit of background, just see if I can get the slides working. There we go. Just a bit of background about me and who I am and what sort of qualifies me to talk to you. As I said, I work in commercial services in Cornwall Council. A bit of background about Cornwall Council. It's what in the UK we call a unitary authority, so it's effectively where a group of municipality authorities were brought together into one very large authority. We have a spend of about 1.3, well, a budget of about 1.3 billion euros a year, and a procurement spend of about 650,000 euros. Fluctuates daily at the moment with the exchange rate as it is, but yeah, we're fairly sizable. We operate a very centralised procurement model, so our commercial services team has the vast majority of procurement people from across the whole council. And we sort of work as a support service. So I understand that most of you are more in the sort of commissioning side, so drafting specifications and our service managers managing contracts and that type of stuff. And so for us as a team, people like yourselves would be clients. So we work with commissioners all across the council to try and make sure they get the best from their procurement exercises and their contracts when they're put in place. I work in a part of the team where we don't do any actual procurement, so I'm not currently a procurement officer as such. I don't run procurement processes. I work in the side of the team that lead on strategy and policy, and my areas that I lead on are the supply chain development program, which is most relevant to this, responsible procurement, including SPP and GPP, and the majority of my background really is in responsible procurement rather than supply chain development. I'm also the lead on innovation procurement. We've done some procurement of innovation, although there is some other really good practice around Europe. And I think complementary to some of these things, and sometimes they're seen as high risk. I'm also the Council's lead on the EU and UK legislation around procurement. Although I do need to praise you that with, I'm not actually a lawyer, so my knowledge is more practical than sort of legal education based. My legal knowledge around the directives and the regulations is very strong, the strongest of anybody in our team, but I do sometimes have to speak to our internal lawyers as well, and they're on board with all of this stuff around market engagement. And a little bit about my background before I did this role. So I project managed a big European project on public procurement of low carbon solutions. I moved into the council to lead on sustainable and responsible procurement. And then I did just over a year, nearly 18 months of actual procurement. So I purchased student social services. And now I've moved into the procurement policy and strategy team. Okay. A little bit of background about the supply chain development program because it's relevant to what I'm talking about today. So the reason why we started with the supply development program here is because there was a lot of little bits of supplier engagement and supplier development happening around the council, but it was really not in a very coordinated way, or not being done in a very coordinated way. There was massive inconsistency. So some teams around the council, very active contract management out there, doing joint training with their suppliers, running market engagement during procurement processes. Other parts of the team and other parts of the council doing none of that, or really piecemeal. So the aim of the supply chain development program was to try and pull some of that together and make it more consistent. And really, when I came to designing it, what I wanted to do was it sounds a bit cheesy, but to create a supplier journey. So the aim was that a supplier could enter a market, a new supplier who didn't know anything about how the council purchases goods and services, and they could then learn about the council, learn about what we do, what we purchase, how we purchase it, and that's what we've put here under the sort of market-wide development heading. There would then be another stage where they would get much better information about the specific category of spend which they're interested in. So say it was a construction supplier, they could get specific category information about what's happening in construction and what contracts we've got coming up and what the expectations might be. Then they would go and be successful, hopefully, in a procurement process if they're the right supplier. We then recognised a gap around supplier induction. So when new suppliers join the council supply chain, do they know what the council's values are? Do they know what our expectations are? Do they know what to expect from contract management? On a very practical level, do they know how the purchase to pay process works and how they're meant to invoice, and the fact that they need a purchase order and all of that type of stuff? So that's the supplier induction stage. And then we're looking at, and this is a part of the program for next year, on robust supplier relationship management. So the council historically has been fairly poor at contract management generally. That contract management practice is now improving, and improving quite quickly. There's somebody in our team who's leading on a similar sort of thing to the supply chain development program, but around contract management internally in the council. So that process is improving, but what I wanted to try and encourage was more of a supplier relationship management approach. So rather than just managing individual contracts, instead managing the overall relationship with suppliers. So that's a bit of background to the program. Now that we can talk a little bit about market engagement. So market engagement has got a lot of roles. What I would say is that my definition of market engagement is potentially broader than some other people's. Market engagement sometimes in an EU directives context can be talking predominantly around the pre-procurement stage. So you're writing a specification, you've got your procurement documents ready, and then you engage with the market to have a discussion about that. I like to view market engagement as a much broader subject. So really as an ongoing subject, I'll sort of come on to in a minute, but in organizations where there's quite strong category management, so individual areas have got responsibility for individual categories of spend, those areas should be doing ongoing market engagement, would be my argument. And I'll come on to explain that later on. But the role of market engagement really is to communicate the needs or requirements to suppliers, and I don't think that's just contract specific. I think that's more generally to understand current market trends around feasibility, so whether whether what you're asking for is feasible or not. I'll caveat that at the end as well, because I want to talk a little bit about risks, or at least perceived risks, and there's some good examples of where the market have said that something isn't feasible, and then when the tender documents have actually gone out, all of a sudden it's become feasible. So don't always necessarily just believe the market when they say that something isn't feasible, although that can be a difficult balance. Capability, so whether the market's actually capable of achieving what's required. The maturity of the market, particularly relevant for us as a local authority, because we buy a lot of education, health and social care services, and those markets are renowned for being very difficult, not very mature, lots and lots of small businesses, very little experience of public procurement. So that's particularly of particular interest to us. And whether the market can achieve what's required quickly enough or on a large enough scale. So it's particularly relevant to innovation procurement. If innovation, this is a big generalization, I'm not sure I 100% buy into it, but innovation generally tends to come from smaller businesses. Do those smaller businesses have the capability to deliver what's required if that innovation is brought forward? It gives you the opportunity to openly and transparently discuss potential solutions, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a sec, and potentially stimulate innovation. So the benefits here, so the big benefits that we tend to see, and this is a big sales point to procurement people, and the main reason why our operational procurement staff are getting becoming increasingly bought into the idea of ongoing market engagement. And this is a big selling point, I think, to procurement people, because it does alleviate risk. And procurement people don't like risk as a generally accepted thing. So it's about flagging potential problems before procurement commences. So historically, we've had plenty of examples of where we've gone out to market for something, sometimes not even something very innovative, and the response has been muted or non-existent. So we've either received one or two very poor tenders or no tenders at all. I wouldn't say it's commonplace, but it happens, and I think it's part of procurement. And as I say, that doesn't necessarily, they're not necessarily only on innovation procurements. And often what has happened is there's a problem with one of these things below. So there's either a problem with the specification, so we've asked them to deliver something that they don't think is feasible, either within the budget or they just generally don't think is feasible. There'll be a problem with the terms and conditions. one of the more common things that we see, because our council in our terms and conditions has a very challenging condition on limitation of liability, and we move a lot of our risk onto our suppliers, and that sometimes can cause issues, particularly in certain sectors. So some sectors are quite used to that. Other sectors, none of them will touch a contract which has a significant limitation of liability clause in it. So it's important to have those discussions with the market beforehand, because often what can happen is otherwise you put the tender out and either you'll get no responses because the market's like, well, we never sign contracts which have that clause in it, or you'll get all qualified responses saying, here's our tender submission, but we don't agree with term 36.7, and therefore our tender is on the basis that clause 36.7 doesn't apply. And obviously, as a public body, we have to be fair and transparent, and that means that we can't accept those qualified tenders. So important to deal with those issues up front. Issues around selection criteria. So a good example here is that we've had a big problem with trying to improve health and safety practice in our social care sector, and our selection criteria sometimes have been not overly onerous, but have come as a shock to the market, and in the past some of those attenders would have benefited from market engagement. And the biggest one for us is to have early discussions around risks and liabilities associated with contracts. So the main reason that we get limited competition in contracts, and I think it really, to me, it puts into perspective the risks associated with innovation procurement and that limiting competition. I would say that 60% plus of the time that we get no tenders is because of risks and liabilities associated with the contract. So either there's a very significant pensions deficit, or there's a very significant number of employees that have to move with the contract, and they carry redundancy liabilities. So really, those are, to me at least, are much bigger risks than an innovative contract. All of these things need to be discussed with the market before a tender can go out, where there are significant risks, because otherwise you really do run, you're just chancing that one of the suppliers is willing to accept those risks rather than dealing with them up front. Ultimately, it should result in better informed specifications and hopefully a better service and better value for money. It should result in advancements in procurement documentation. So something that we're starting to try and do here is, as part of our pre-market engagement, we actually are publishing the procurement documents, not for return by the suppliers, just for their comments, so that we can try and get some feedback on the procurement documents themselves. It helps the suppliers and markets plan for the future. People like to be able to business plan in their businesses. If they've got a very large contract that they're interested in, or a number of small contracts, and they want to be, clued up about when those are coming and what they're likely to be like. It should increase competition because you're alleviating some of these risks that I flagged at the start, and it should help to drive innovation as well. Okay. I want to talk a little bit now about when to conduct market engagement. And this is where I was saying my definition maybe of market engagement, and the definition that we're using in the interest group is maybe a little broader than some definitions that have been used in the past. I also want to talk about what I feel at least are prerequisites to market engagement. So what you have to do before you can reasonably start a market engagement approach. And for me, on an individual contract, and these lists are still in development. I don't know whether Stella's given you any advanced background about what we're doing, but at the moment in the interest group, we're working on a tool which hopes to take a list of criteria, and we'll talk about that later on, and from that work out whether a contract needs certain types of market engagement. And really, some of those questions you can't ask until you've done some of this prerequisite work. So desktop research, consulting with colleagues and other public authorities is really important. Other people will have purchased what you've purchased before. Other people may well have attempted innovative procurement, whether they deemed it as innovative or not. So that's really important. And potentially, and we're looking into this at the moment, a market position statement. So market position statement is something historically that's been used in the UK health and social care sector, but what we're trying to do is apply it to a much broader range of categories. And it's where you publish in advance an annual or 3-year plan of what you're going to do in a certain sector. So that might be energy and utilities. It could be facilities management, construction, waste management, and you publish maybe a 5-page document to say this is what our anticipated way forward is over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 year period, and these are the contracts which are likely to come up, etc., to try and give a bit more insight into the public procurement process for the potential suppliers. Once you've done those prerequisites, and I think market position statements, there's definitely a debate still to be had about whether those are a prerequisite or not. But then there is a bunch of different stages that you can do your market engagement. So you need to do it on an ongoing basis. You can do it as part of the pre-procurement process, so before the contract notice has gone out. You can do it as part of the procurement itself. Slightly increased risk, and we'll talk about that, but it is possible. We have done it, and others have done it as well. And then post-award. So once you've awarded the contract, the procurement process is over. As I said at the start, what I think is becoming clear to us in the interest group is that this really should be a cycle. Perfect example of this is one of my other colleagues on the interest group, Bettina. She very much uses this cycle. So she has an ongoing engagement with the market in the areas that she purchases. She runs pre-procurement, market engagement, then procurement market engagement, then post-award. And the ongoing engagement starts pretty much as soon as the contract has been awarded in those sectors where it's been deemed appropriate to run that market engagement. So try and think about this as a cycle as we're going through it. Okay, so just some examples of market engagement. Some of these will be familiar to you. Some of them may not be. I'm going to run through them one by one, not in any great detail, and if you want any more detail in the longer term, what we're doing at the moment, I'm hoping to have it finished in the next couple of weeks, is that for each of these types of market engagement, I'm writing a 1-page guidance document about how to run it. And then along with the tool, which we'll talk about in a bit, it will give people in our team at least practical guidance as to how to run each type of market engagement. So on an ongoing basis, contract opportunities, forward plan, procurement, forward plan, commercial forward plan, whatever you want to call it, some type of forward plan which tells suppliers when you're going to put out, or at least roughly when you're going to put out contract opportunities. This can be an extremely difficult document to get together, depending on the type of organisation that you work for and the breadth of goods, services and works which are being purchased across the breadth of teams. It's taken us 4 or 5 years to get our first one published. It is now available, and if you go on the Cornwall Council website, you can see it. It does still need some more work to firm up what's happening in the future. What we're trying to be more transparent about with suppliers is where there is a future contract opportunity, for example, where we're going to buy from a national framework, rather than go out to market for that one individual contract. We're trying to be transparent about that in advance so that they're not expecting it to come out and then it doesn't. I think that's quite key. There's also the opportunity to go to trade shows, read industry publications, all of that type of stuff. So basically good category management. So understanding your sector, understanding the suppliers, understanding the market, so that you've got that base knowledge to enter into discussions with the market when the time is right for an individual contract. Estelle's asked me to focus a little bit on risk, and really here, anything in the ongoing and pre-procurement stages I would deem as pretty low risk. The directors now actively encourage us to conduct market engagement. I would argue that in certain circumstances, not for every contract, but in certain circumstances, you cannot get value for money if you haven't done some type of market engagement. Particularly where you're looking for innovation from the market and some other things as well. There is, I would say, a requirement to do market engagement to get it right. So at the pre-procurement stage, these really are quite key, and these are ones which in our organisation are fairly well established now. So people are running these, not at the moment in a particularly coordinated and consistent way. And I'm issuing some internal guidance over the next few weeks to try and help with that. But some of these things we've been doing for quite some time. So market sounding questionnaires or soft market tests, normally either a Word document or an online questionnaire through something like SurveyMonkey, asking the market about, well, it could be anything, but normally around the specification for the service, goods, services or works that you want to purchase. As I say, can focus on the procurement documents or really could focus on any of these areas that we identified back here. So specification, could focus on the terms and conditions. Even previously we have focused on risks and liabilities, so we've talked to people about, we've put questions in there saying, if there were to be a pension deficit in this particular contract, what would you deem to be a viable pensions deficit? What would you deem not to be a viable pensions deficit? That type of stuff. So so I just closed my being binged at by my emails. Just close it down. Yeah, that type of stuff is really important to try and get clear up front. The disadvantage of that type of engagement, just go back to this other slide, is that it's kind of two-way, but it's not really two-way. So you're asking a bunch of questions, you're getting responses to a bunch of questions, but there's no dialogue. So what it tends to lend itself to is where there are specific issues and you're aware that there are specific issues, or you need feedback on one specific bit of a specification that's maybe not all that complex. It works less well, in my opinion, for innovative contract opportunities, and the reason for that is that innovative contract opportunities tend to require more of a two-way conversation, because you're actively looking for something from the suppliers. A prior invitation notice, a PIN, and in the UK we have a similar thing on our national portal as well called a future opportunities notice or something. We publish these regularly now. It's pretty much as soon as we're sure that we're going to purchase something, we will tend to put a prior invitation notice out. They can also be useful tools for inviting people to fill out market sounding questionnaires or to attend supplier information days, which we'll come on to talk about in a minute. So a useful tool certainly that I think increasingly people are using, and they're not using it really to reduce the tender timescales, which is one of the other benefits. Really, it's just to do with letting the market know about what's coming up. Pre-procurement supplier information days. Again, we run these regularly. In some markets more than others. Tend to lend themselves more to more innovative procurements or very complex procurements. So rather than with a market sounding questionnaire where you might be looking for specific feedback on a couple of points, supplier information days can be used more where you're broadly questioning the need, broadly questioning the level of innovation, the capability of the market, that type of stuff. Historically, procurement professionals have raised risks associated with supplier information days, particularly around fairness and transparency. In my mind at least, and I think in the mind of a lot of people who know the new director as well, those risks are really alleviated now. So providing you're fair and transparent in how those supplier information days are conducted, and you're not, for example, just inviting a list of suppliers that you are aware exist in the market or some that you've heard are particularly innovative, providing you run them openly advertised to the sector that might be interested, preferably even in your prior invitation notice or through some similar mechanism. And you publish afterwards everything that's been discussed, any questions that were asked, all that type of stuff. The risk really is relatively low because it's before the procurement process. As we'll come on to talk about, when it's during the procurement process, the risk is definitely more significant. But at this stage, I think fairly low. Type of things that we cover at supplier information days would be, normally it will be done as sort of a general introduction to the contract, what we're expecting. Might be an introduction to the tender documentation. We recently moved on to an e-tendering system. So at the moment, all of our supplier information days have a 1-hour training session in them about the tendering system, where to find opportunities, how to submit a response, all that type of stuff. And those are the types of things that can be really useful. They're also particularly useful for markets which are undeveloped or underdeveloped when it comes to responding to public procurement opportunities. The public procurement process can be pretty complex for small businesses who are not used to engaging with it. So supplier information days can be a good way of alleviating some of those some of the potential issues that suppliers can see in engaging with the public procurement process, and ultimately result in better competition and hopefully more innovative solutions as well. Meeting with industry bodies, so it might be that in the industry that you're purchasing from, there is an industry body that represents the suppliers that you can get in contact with. It's always a useful thing to do. And sometimes where you have a requirement for either a consortia to tender for a contract. I think this is particularly relevant potentially where you're looking at innovation, where there might be an application of a technology in one sector to a sector which has not been used before for. Supplier networking events can be really useful for that. So inviting suppliers to talk to each other about potential subcontracting opportunities or consortia events and consortia bids and that type of stuff. So we have run those before, relatively few and far between, but we have done them, and with mixed results, I would say. Sometimes it really depends on the sector and how competitive the competitors are, how willing they are to collaborate on stuff. Works better where there's a subcontracting model, so rather than building a consortia more for main contractors to find subcontractors to deliver, say, an innovative part of a contract, or could be a part of a contract with particularly stretching sustainability criteria. It might be that one lot in a contract is focused on a general purchase, and then another lot has greater GPP criteria. It might be that a prime contractor brings on board somebody with a specialism in that GPP area to help with that. So those types of things that can be really useful. All of those things, I think, relatively low risk. Still be careful. It's important to be careful, and it wouldn't surprise me if procurement people in your organisations are still quite risk averse when it comes to this. But really, providing it's done in a fair and transparent way, and we'll talk about alleviating those risks later on, then I think it should be, you should be fairly safe. One thing that we've started doing recently, within the last 12 months, is running market engagement during the procurement process. Certainly here there is a heightened risk, an increased risk. We have run supplier briefings just after the contract notice has been published. So we publish the contract notice, and in the contract notice it will say, the authority will be running through the tender documents with suppliers in 2 weeks' time, it works particularly well where there's majoritively a local market. It's more difficult if you've got national and international providers, but if you have particular sectors where the likelihood is the local market are going to be the only people that are interested, it can work better there. Here you've got to be really, really structured in how you conduct those briefings. Really got to think about how you're going to document what's being said. If you can video the event, even better, publish the video. But fairness and transparency at this point, becomes of the utmost importance. We have also run supplier training, so say on our e-tendering system, for example, because sometimes, irrespective of how many times you tell the suppliers that they need to attend e-tendering training before you advertise the contract opportunity, they'll leave it until the contract opportunity is advertised and then ask for the training. It seems to be pretty much unavoidable. All we do there is, we keep the training very focused on whatever we're training them on, and avoid any conversation, discussion, questions on the tender, and ask them to pursue that through the clarifications route. And again, providing you do that properly, I think the risk is reduced, but because it's done during the tender process, there is always a risk. Equally, you can do supply chain networking, maybe slightly lower risk. Sometimes, starting with just a short presentation from the authorities saying this is the contract, but not to invite questions, and then literally just to leave the suppliers or potential suppliers to themselves to talk to each other. Works on certain types of projects and not on others. We have also, only a couple of times, but hopefully we'll increasingly do this, offered post-award supplier debriefs. So obviously, in line with the regulations, we send people back feedback on their tenders, where they were stronger or weaker than the person that was awarded the contract. But also, it's useful sometimes to do a sector-wide supplier debrief to cover general trends. So for us, for example, in health and social care, it might be a significant proportion of those people who failed at the selection criteria, they failed on health and safety. And the way that they could address that issue in future is to get health and safety accreditation that meets our requirements. Those types of things can be really useful to inform future market development. And really, there is the link between market engagement on a contract and wider market development. So if you've got minimal competition because the suppliers are not meeting your expectations, then really that's where you need to be making that link back into the market development side. I think Stella's going to want me to finish up relatively quickly, so there's time for questions, but I have another 5 minutes probably. As I said, what we're trying to do at the moment is to build a bit of a model which takes this list that we've just been through, a slightly longer version, it has to be said, of this list, different types of market engagement, and applies a number of criteria to a contract, and gives guidance to operational procurement staff and commissioners on what types of market engagement might be appropriate for that contract. And it's based on the premise that, in answer to this first question, for you, in my view at least, is that market engagement is not always the right thing to do. One of the problems that we've got in our team, for example, is that some people who have seen the benefits of market engagement, they run quite comprehensive market engagement on pretty much every tender. And consequently, that's diverting resource away from other areas where market engagement might be more appropriate. So really what we need to get a feel for is when is market engagement the right thing to do, and making the assumption that it's not always the right thing to do. Does it always need to be a two-way conversation? Was another question that we've been dealing with at the interest group, and I think the answer to that is no. Sometimes the market engagement can literally just be giving suppliers more detail or more advanced detail on what's coming up. It doesn't always need to be a two-way conversation, although in the case of innovation procurement, I would argue that it does always need to be a two-way conversation. Here's the list of criteria that we've got at the moment, which hopefully when I build this model, these will be scored by the operational person, and the model will throw out a sort of pick list of things that might be appropriate. So how complex is the product or service? So it could be, and this is making the assumption that complexity and innovation are not the same thing. So we, for example, here we've got a huge road build scheme happening at the moment, widening of our main road that runs through Cornwall. I think it's a £65 million project, so about 75 million euros, and over just over 12 months, and that was a very, very complex project, but it wasn't particularly innovative. It's just road widening. These suppliers have done road widening before, so there's no potential issue there. That's a complex product or service, or it technically works, where there's not a great deal of innovation. So complexity of the product or service, complexity of the market. So is it a monopoly? Are there just a small handful of providers? Is there a very highly competitive market with lots of providers? Because that potentially will influence the type of market engagement that you do as well. How mature is the market? So on two levels there really. How mature is it generally as businesses? Are they all very small SMEs, relatively new? Or is it that they're well-established businesses? And do they have experience of running through public procurement processes or not? Is the second bit of that. What's the scope for innovation? Because as I said before, where there's innovation, there's probably a greater requirement for a two-way conversation. What's the scope for delivering policy through procurement objectives? So social value, sustainable procurement, social procurement, GPP, whatever your policy procurement objectives are as an organisation. What's the scope to deliver those? What's the value of the contract? Market engagement can be fairly time-consuming, particularly where it's a two-way conversational thing, and we need to ensure that the resource. I don't think that the value of the contract is as important, say, as the complexity and the level of innovation, but it is an important factor. And importantly, what's the balance of knowledge between the buyer and the supplier? So if you're able to draft a specification without any input from the market, then maybe that's the best thing to do. But in areas where the market has far more information than you do in the organisation, then really you need to be trying to make the most of some of that. A little bit, and I realise I'm running over, Estella, but focus on pre-market engagement. Estella asked me to run through a couple of these.
No worries, you have 3 or 4 more minutes.
Cool. I've only got 2 or 3 more slides. So, the focus on pre-market engagement, particularly around, and we've been through some of this anyway, but market sounding questionnaires, or soft market tests as we call them here. I think they're normally called market sounding questionnaires in Europe, and supplier information days. We talked a bit about the differences between these already, but market sounding questionnaire or soft market test is an opportunity to sound out the market, try and encourage some of those issues which might come up in the procurement to come out before the procurement, around the specification, terms and conditions, whatever it is. They work particularly well where the need is complex but not particularly innovative, and where you've got a lot of innovation may not be the right way to go, because they don't enable that two-way conversation quite so well. If you're going to publish one, and our team have been guilty of this in the past, make sure you give the market long enough to respond to them, particularly if the requirements in the soft market test are quite complex. Or say, for example, they've got to read like a 50-page specification in order to respond. Putting it out there for 1 working week is probably not sufficient. It needs to be out there for 3-4 weeks beforehand. Normally, we would publish ours alongside a prior invitation notice, but they could just be shared on the website. Or I'd rather, personally here, I'd rather they don't get sent just to a group of suppliers that we're aware of. Always, I try and encourage that people communicate with the whole market. A supplier information day, as we said, is an opportunity for more face-to-face conversation. It's a two-way conversation, can be more useful for innovation procurements and more innovative procurements. These traditionally have been seen as relatively high risk, but I think in reality the risk is relatively minimal, providing that you can record, whether that's video record or document everything that's happening on those days and share it online at the earliest opportunity. One of the other advantages of that is it's an opportunity to cover some of the practical aspects, and e-tendering systems might be an example of that, but there could be others. These are just some scenarios. Hopefully Estella can share the slides afterwards so you can have a think about it. This was really just food for thought, and it may not be relevant to your organisations anyway, but relevant to here in Cornwall. So what I've been trying to do for people here as part of the guidance is to put together some scenarios that they can think about. So catering, it's a potentially complex service. We're a big organisation. We have a lot of different properties. It's a pretty complex market because it could be provided by, catering providers. It could be provided by restaurants and cafes, like third parties. It could be provided by, might be that people, if the contract's big enough, they could move over from other sectors, wholesale and that type of thing. Might be cooking on-site, cooking off-site. There potentially is some complexity there. It's a pretty mature market. They're relatively used to, for the most part, responding to public procurements. There's some scope for innovation. There's scope for sustainability criteria, moderate spend, but limited savings, and a balance of knowledge between buyer and supplier. So what I've got here, and these afterwards, so we can have a discussion about them as part of the questions. But residential care for elderly people, complex, highly complex market, complex services, immature. These are some of our real pinch points as an authority. We've got issues in these markets: high spend, very high spend, like 40 or 50% of our budget, and real significant potential for savings if we were to introduce some innovation as well. Municipality fleet, again, just another example. So simple market in this case, very mature, limited or moderate scope for innovation depending on the spend, but significant scope for sustainability criteria. And what we're trying to think about is how that would impact the types of market engagement that we conduct. Potential risks and mitigating actions. So fairness and transparency is always highlighted as the main risk. So always openly advertise all opportunities. Make clear to the suppliers which discussions are commercial in confidence and which are not. It's really important. So sometimes it's all right to meet with a supplier as long as it's a many-to-many, I would say. That would be my personal guidance. But so multiple people from the authority side, multiple people from the supplier side. If you're going to have one-to-one meetings like that between buyer and supplier, then you need to highlight which bits are commercial in confidence and which bits are going to be published. Publish everything which has not been explicitly made commercial in confidence. And don't meet with suppliers just one person from the buyer side and one person from the supplier side, because even if it's deemed to be fair, potentially there's always a potential corruption issue there, which should just be avoided if it can be. And I think this is another risk which people highlight to me. So suppliers are salesmen and women. Don't be fooled by extravagant claims. So sometimes you'll get a claim from a supplier that is just totally out there in comparison to what the rest of the market can do. Take those with a bit of a pinch of salt. Equally, don't be fooled by claims of it can't be done. And we've seen examples of this. In Copenhagen, we've got a really good one where the market told them they pre-released an opportunity over a year in advance of when the contract was going to go out, and said that what they needed. The market told them consistently for a year that it couldn't be done. And then as the tender went out, everybody, or there was plenty of tender response. So don't be fooled by that. You need to again take that with a pinch of salt. You've got to try finding a balance between facilitating innovative solutions and not excluding solutions which have been used in the past. Is a really fine balance, and outcome-based specifications can be a way of achieving that. But there's some important things to be considered there. And that's it. I don't know whether you want to open up for questions or whether you've had any questions sent to you.
Hi, David. Thank you very much first for sharing with us your experience. We have now, as we said, 10 minutes for questions, and if you allow me, I will start with a question of my own. And in the meantime, please, the rest of participants, you can send me your questions via the chat. I already have gathered a couple, but if you have any further questions, please go ahead. Okay, my first question. You mentioned that you sometimes publish your procurement documents ahead of the procurement process, and then you get feedback from your suppliers. And then I wanted to ask you, how do you do this? I mean, how long ahead? Who receives them? What kind of feedback do you get when you do this?
We've only done it a couple of times, but we're doing it increasingly now. I think to how far ahead you want to be publishing it. At least a couple of months ahead, really, to give you an opportunity to respond to any queries that come up. So it should be published a long way in advance, as long as it's feasibly possible, really. And in terms of the types of response that we get, often it's confusion around wording. So how the questions are worded might be whether it's clear whether a selection criteria is pass-fail and what constitutes a pass and what constitutes a fail. We get lots of queries like that. So the responses have been pretty broad. A lot of suppliers will just use it as an opportunity to have foresight of the documents. They won't necessarily give any feedback, but even that probably is a positive thing. So we don't get like lots and lots of feedback. The feedback that we tend to get has been useful in designing the final tender pack. So it's something I would encourage people to do. Openly advertise it by whatever route you're going to advertise it when the actual contract notice goes out, so that everybody's got a fair opportunity to see the tender documents at the same time, I would say.
Okay, thank you. I have another question regarding the contract opportunity forward plan. And again, I would like to ask you, how do you do this? And do you always carry on with the procurements that you announce in this plan? Because sometimes, if you announce this a very long time ahead, it's difficult to commit.
Yeah. So our procurement forward plan, commercial forward plan, is reviewed on a quarterly basis. It's on our website with a very robust disclaimer saying that not all of these opportunities will necessarily be advanced. Some may not come to open market, some might be awarded through framework agreements, etc., etc. So there's quite a hefty disclaimer on there, protecting the council from any potential complaints from suppliers that we haven't gone ahead with something that we said we were going to. Obviously, there are things on there that either slip, so they come out 6 months later than we were expecting, and equally some things that come up as a result of, say, we get some funding to do something. It wasn't on the forward plan, so there will be some opportunities which are done on such tight timescales that they don't make it onto the forward plan. It might be that we get the funding awarded and we go out, we put our contract notice out within the same quarter, and therefore it doesn't ever appear on the forward plan. It's not perfect, but we just need to be transparent with suppliers that those things can happen. And providing we're transparent, we see that the suppliers will benefit from having the list, even if it's not 100% accurate.
Okay, so you didn't have the issue, because this topic came up some time ago. That people say if you don't really do what you were saying you were going to do, next time you publish your forward plan, no one will actually react to this because they won't really trust you. So you haven't had the situation.
We haven't had it yet. I guess we'll wait and see how it progresses. Everything that has come from supplier, I do quite a lot of supplier engagement events, and the suppliers always say that they need to see what's coming up, and the only way we can do that is with a very significant caveat, because everybody here will be aware things change. But budgets change, organisations change, structures change, services change. And we try, if anything, to underestimate what's likely to come up rather than overestimate. So we only put stuff on there which we're fairly sure is going to actually happen, and we try and take a measured approach to that. But equally, there is a possibility that we'd become open to criticism because we haven't put something on a forward plan which we then end up tendering. So it's a bit damned if you do, damned if you don't, to be honest. But I think either way, the suppliers find it useful.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of questions that have come to me. I don't know whether you can see them.
Is the question that answers?
Yeah,
yes?
I've got one that says, usually how many suppliers are participating in your conversations?
Yes.
That really depends on the market. So we have some markets. So, for example, we run some supplier engagement recently on insurance. the insurance market, or an insurance market, at least for organisations willing to insure an organisation of our size with our risk, is very limited. There's only about 3 or 4 providers. So obviously there it's a little bit more intimate. When we ran market engagement a couple of years ago on our domiciliary care, so care home contract, we were engaging with 250 odd suppliers, maybe even more. We ran a series of supplier engagement days all across the county to ensure that everyone had equal access to the supplier engagement opportunities. So yeah, it can really, really vary. I would say for innovation procurement, markets where there aren't 250 suppliers would be a little bit easier, because having quality conversations with that many suppliers can be pretty challenging and very time consuming. But sometimes obviously you don't get to pick the type of market where innovation is necessary. I've also got one which says, what are suppliers' possibility of appeal in the procurement process? There's lots of, in UK law at least, there's a whole bunch of different ways that people can appeal. Obviously, they can challenge under the Remedies Directive, which is the sort of most, is perceived as the biggest risk by procurement people. That can only happen on projects that are over the OG thresholds, which about 170,000 euros, maybe a little bit more. I struggled with the exchange rate, because the exchange rate there is fixed for euros to pounds for the duration. It's 174,000 pounds anyway for goods and services, 4.2 million for works. Challenged under remedies is quite serious consequences. It happens pretty rarely. It's happened to us once in the last 5 years since I've been at the authority. It's much more likely that they're just going to put in a complaint, either a complaint through the council's complaints procedure, or in the UK we have the Crown Commercial Service, the government's central procurement team. They run a service called the Mystery Shopper, and suppliers can go to them, report issues to them, anonymously if they wish, or not anonymously, with procurement processes. So that's another way that suppliers can raise issue with what we've done. My general feeling is that robust supplier engagement makes it less likely to get challenged, providing you run it correctly, because you're actually getting a lot of those issues out before the procurement process has even started, rather than running the procurement process and then those issues coming to a head right at the end. You know, my overall feeling would be that if it's run correctly, then overall it can reduce risk in the procurement process. So lots to do. They can also in the UK challenge by judicial review, which is slightly rarer, but that's where they challenge under UK law that we've breached the UK public contract regulations. So lots of ways that suppliers can challenge the procurement process, but providing it's done properly, there's no reason that should be a problem.
Okay, great. And then we have one last question that came in the chat fairly to me. I don't think you can see it. And it says, would you say it is more important to have market engagement when doing GPP compared to regular procurements?
That's an interesting one. You'll see obviously that GPP is on my, or not GPP explicitly, but there's my slide with the reasons to run market engagement criteria. So what's the scope for delivering policy through procurement objectives? I would include GPP in there. The answer really, to me at least, is more dependent on whether that market, if that GPP is new for the market, then I think yes, yes, market engagement is really important. Let's try and give it a bit of context. So vehicles, for example, GPP criteria in vehicles are fairly well established. The vehicle manufacturers are fairly well aware of public requirements around particularly cars, maybe less so with buses. I mean, that's still a fairly new area, but with energy efficient or fuel efficient cars, that's fairly well established. market engagement may not necessarily be necessary there because it's a GPP. There are GPP criteria, but it's fairly well established in the market. Whereas if you've got an area where you're trying to use new GPP criteria that your market are not familiar with, certainly market engagement would be a really good thing to conduct, because otherwise there is a likelihood that you will get very limited competition, some very annoyed suppliers who are wondering why you've asked them to do something that you haven't asked them to do before. Much better to have those discussions in advance.
Okay, thank you very much. We are almost on time, so I think that we should finish it right now. Thank you very much, David. Thanks everyone also for participating in the webinar and for your questions. And well, just to say that we will be uploading this webinar to the GreenS webpage and the YouTube channel. So if you feel like you would like to relive what David has been explaining today, then feel free.
Oh, you didn't tell me about YouTube, Stella.
Oh, well, we can avoid that one if you only the GreenS channel.
Yeah, that's fine. And if anybody needs to get in contact with me or has any other questions afterwards, then my email address, one of my email addresses is on the bottom of that slide there. So it's responsible.procurement@cornwall.gov.uk.
Okay. Thank you very much. So a pleasure, and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks.